So, is it nice and warm over there now?
Yeah, it's in the mid 30s.
Wow.
Super hot, super hot. We're in Netanya now in Iriamim for a little bit.
Oh, okay.
It's a very big difference in humidity and heat and stuff like that. So yeah, from Jerusalem.
What it's hotter or warm
Yeah,
or cooler?
it's much hotter and the air doesn't clear like in Yerushalayim at night. It drops and it's quite nice to walk. But here doesn't drop. It doesn't drop. It's really hot.
Very painful, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
I was on a Yom Yerushalayim tour to see some of the sites of the battles, and there was a guy on it that said he knew you, Rabbi. His name is um,
Do I
Mark
owe him money?
Hess.
What?
Mark Hess.
Oh, sure. I know Marquez. Sure.
Your
So he
money.
says to say hello.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
He
His
didn't ask
son.
for any money, so
Oh,
you're
okay,
safe.
good. All right, thanks. His son's a rabbi in the US in New Jersey. His son is a rabbi. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's very nice.
He spoke highly of you.
Oh yeah, no. So I must have paid
And
him.
by the way, so did I.
Thank you. Okay. All right. So let's get started. We're in the middle of this tshuva. Oh, sorry. Yeah, there we go. So we're in the middle of this tshuva where we're trying to discover how you assess damages when a person. So what we saw yesterday is something really surprising, is that there's a difference between a mazik, a person who destroys property, whether willfully or unintentionally, and a shomer. A shomer's level of responsibility is to make the person whole, and the mazik just has to pay for the value of what he damaged, even if, welcome back, Joby, even if it's not going to make the person whole. Okay. So that's what we were in the middle of yesterday. And we were talking about a woman who gave her earrings in to be serviced by a jeweler. The jeweler lost one of the earrings and now just wants to pay for the replacement value of one earring, which he claims because the set is worth 400. He says, I'll pay you 200. And she says, that's not going to make me whole, because in order for me to get a replacement earring, I'm going to need to pay $250. So you should have to pay me for my net loss, right? Which is now, and the way he said you look at it is that you look at what I have now, the value of what I currently have, and the value of what I had before you allowed for this item to get stolen. And that's the difference that a person should pay. So if the value currently of a singular earring for her is only 150, that's probably maybe the most she could get for it, because it's not easy to sell a singular earring. So for that reason, the jeweler should have to pay her the 250. That's what we've seen so far. So and I guess what we should try to do is, let me just see. So that's what we saw yesterday. That what shemishalim lefi hanezik shegaram lo v'lochein benidon didan yechayev $250. The afal pisha zerak grama ugrama ben ezikin potter, even though it's only causative. Kaimelon sheshomrin chayavim l'shalim gam begrama v'lochein chayev l'shalim lo et melo hanezik, and then if you have to pay full damages. Now, the flip side of this is Leumat Zos B'Shut Zera Yaakov Kasav Sheyishalim Lo Kefi Ha'erach Shel Hachefet Sha'avad Kemoshe Hayashave Kishahu Im Ben Zuga. There's a difference. There's a dissenting opinion in the Sefer Zera Yaakov. And he is of the opinion that you pay based on what it was worth when it was part of a pair. Behevi raya lidvarav meha gemara bebava kama, sha'adam shekotzatz tamarim, kishahayu bosar velo shavim kolkach eich yishalim. The Gemara in Bava Kama asks an interesting question. I go into your orchard, your date orchard, and I prematurely cut down your dates. The dates haven't ripened yet. So I've caused you damage by cutting down your dates before I could have benefited from them in the normative way. But at the time when you cut them down, they were only worth, let's say, a half or a third of their value because they had not yet ripened. So how much do you owe me for having cut down my dates? Im yishalim lo shivoy tmarim b'shelim harehizik rak bosa. Now here's an example of a mazik, right? So like we saw yesterday, there could be a difference between a mazik and a shomer, but we'll have to see where he goes with this. So on the one hand, if you tell me, if the argument is going to be that you have to pay me the full value, if let's say you cut down 100 dates, even though they were not ripe yet, you still have to pay me for 100 ripe dates because that's what I would have done had you not, I would have waited until they ripened. But at the time when I damaged your dates, they were not worth $1 a piece, let's say. They were only worth maybe 25 cents a piece. Lachein ha-gemara amra sheyishalim hamazik masha mishalim mi shekona boser hamachuber lekarka. And therefore the Gemara says that that you as the mazik have to pay whatever a person would have normally paid for unripened dates while they're still attached to the ground. Now, that's sort of like that's what we would call a futures of value. So it currently has very little value, but if I buy it while it's still attached and that gives me the rights to harvest it and so forth, so then I might pay, let's say, 75% of the value. Shemishalim yoter mishivoy haboser lelo karka kiven sha'atidim hatmarim lihitbashel avol pachot mishivoy tmarim b'shelim. So it's more that it's worth. That's the amount that you have to pay is more than unripe dates, because it's a person who's buying unripe dates still attached to the tree is going to pay more in anticipation that they're going to ripen, but you're paying less than what fully ripened dates go for. Right, so it's somewhere in between the two. So it's because you're paying for futures. Because of Hazera Yaakov, dehu hadin linidon didan, shelo yishali $250. And so therefore, in the case where the jeweler lost one of the earrings, and it costs her $250 to hire a jeweler to make a replica, so then you wouldn't have to pay $200, and that's going to cost her $250. So the guy, the jeweler who lost it, will not have to pay the full $250. Kevin shebisha shehiziko hu haya shaveh rak matayim mishum shahaya yachad im ben zugo. Well, let's think about it. At the time when it was lost, at the time when the shomer became liable for its loss, how much was it worth? It was only worth 200 because it was existent together with its pair, with the other earring. So it was worth half of 400. However, and therefore we can't hold you liable for the full 250 if the amount of loss that you caused was only 200. Just like we can't hold you liable to do the replacement value of fully ripened dates because they weren't ripened at the time when the damage was caused. Al-Kain Yishalim Rak Matayim. And therefore you have to pay only 200. So this is a dissenting opinion. And if you take a look at the Makor Baruch, he says, Uchem Askanos Hazera Yaakov Kain Helu B'Sefer Birech Yitzchak Haroj Rishon Letzion Mahara Ashkenazi B'Sof Sefer Darchei Ish Shut Ol Yitzchak V'Shut Pnei Yitzchak Va'od ein lahagriach b'shut rav pe'ilim. He says, he's quoting a number of different Sfarim who side with this new opinion. Shemitchila nira shehiskim l'kol Eliyahu ki lo ra shem cholek alav v'kasav shem b'yadu sefer zer Yaakov u'birech Yitzchak la'ayin bahem. Uvesof hatshuva sham hevi b'shem hagri abulafia shekatav lo b'shem haposkim hanal shecholku ala kol Eliyahu b'shechiv rak chamishim. So, right, we saw yesterday a tshuva from a sefer called Kol Eliyahu, which argued the opposite and said that you'd have to pay whatever the replacement value is. So here's the svara. He says the remaining earring is still intact. And even though it's now experienced a reduction in value, because it's only a singular earring, not a part of a pair, the mazik or the shomer can say, look, here's your stuff. What do you want from me? And therefore, it's like a type of damage that is not physically recognizable. And we know that there's a principle of hezek she'eno nicker, you're putter. I'm exempt if I cause you damage that is not physically recognizable. I don't have to pay for that. The afal pisha b'shut to'afod re'em katav l'chayev baze afal pisha hezek she'eno nicker mikol makom kasav pnei Yitzchak diachol liton kimli v'chein kasav be'er shai she'echol omer lo harei shel chalafanecha ayin sham. So you've seen this word kimli a number of times. Basically, whenever you have a machlokes between two parties, where there's a clear acknowledgement of liability, but the question is, how much am I liable? And there's a machlokes in the poskim, how much the liability is. The guilty party can say kimli. I hold like the posek who would hold me liable for less, not like the posek who would hold me liable for more. And since we have a legitimate machlokes, whether you have to pay the replacement value or the value of the item at the time when I caused its loss, so then the jeweler who's liable can say, I paskin like the opinion who holds me liable for less. So therefore, that's Rav Sharaga's conclusion. Lachein, kevin sheyesh benidon didan machlokes haposkim, hamuchzak yachol liton kimli, kahaposkim de'enu chayiv l'shalim yoter meha hezek, dahainu $200. Okay, so so Marv, you were talking yesterday about in Canadian law that there are different ways of assessing damages.
Right.
So you had started saying that there's something called replacement value, and what was the other value you said?
Right. So there's different ways to look at it. So in this case, it seems to me that the machlokes is whether or not you're liable for direct damage, or you could also be responsible for indirect or consequential or loss of opportunity, loss of profit. And many times, for example, we were looking at Amazon the other day, a lost delivery. So let's say you ordered, let's say, software or something, and they lost it. So and they're liable for, aside from the exclusion clauses and the caps on damages and all that, but generally the direct damage would be they were responsible for the lost item, let's say the earring or something, the cost. So replacement cost or value of that earring. But sometimes, and it depends whether it's contract or negligence or bailment or whatever, you could also be responsible for indirect damage or consequential loss. So for example, you could argue, you lost my software. If I had it, I would have been able to organize my contract, ability to do work and make profit because I could have sold more houses or something because of the software, makes it easier to organize my business. And I've lost an opportunity to, because of the lack of software, to make money.
Right.
It is possible to be liable for the loss of profit in certain circumstances too, which would be or consequential indirect or loss of opportunity damages as well. So
Right.
I think that's kind of where, in a certain sense, this is kind of like that too.
A little bit, although I could hear a distinction between what you've described and the causative damage that we're talking about over here. Because what the causative damage that you're describing, Marv, is not directly related to the value of the item that was lost. It's a result of the fact that I don't have the product, that I've lost money in a related enterprise. Whereas in this situation, when the jeweler loses one earring, the other earring, it was part of a pair. So there's a direct connection to the reduction in value of an asset that I currently have. So I certainly see a more direct causation over here. I'm not sure whether any of the poskim that we saw in the tshuva today would hold a person liable if through the loss of a tool or a piece of software that the user was not able to complete a certain transaction, that they would ever be able to hold the person liable. That's already, I think, a grumma according to everybody. I'm not sure that we in halacha that would be able to hold water. But here, because I gave the jeweler a pair of earrings and he's only giving me back one earring, unless I'm Michael Jackson, I'm not going to really have very much use for one earring. It really would either mean that I take a loss of the 400, which is what the value of these earrings are, or I would have to hire a jeweler to create a replica from scratch, which will cost a lot more than the individual value of each earring, right?
Hey, Rabbi, you mind if I ask kind of a newbie question?
Sorry, who's speaking?
Shlomo, I was wondering if
Oh,
I
hi.
can
Hi, Shlomo. Yeah, sure. What is the
kind
question?
of a newbie question. When you're saying the jeweler can choose, oh, I go by what this guy's saying, or I go by what this guy's darshaning, are we allowed to like say, oh, I go by Beis Shammai instead of Beis Hillel?
All right. Yeah. So that's a good question. There is a limit to how far a person can say I go like, right? Kimli, which is, so if once something is paskind in the Shulchan Aruch, like a certain opinion, an individual cannot say I go like the opinion that the Shulchan Aruch doesn't go like. Similarly, if there's a clear consensus among the vast majority of poskim that the halacha is X, and there's maybe just one responsum that goes in the other direction, you also cannot say kimli. There has to be a legitimate dispute, which remains, let's say, a matter of discussion among the poskim, where a person can say kimli. Okay. So this is really really a fascinating tshuva, because it takes into consideration replacement value versus actual damage. And essentially what we're concluding is that it's not clear cut among the poskim. There was a distinction that we between Shomrim and Mazikin that we saw earlier in the tshuva. We saw that according to this opinion of the Toafot Re'im and the Kol Eliyahu, that they felt that because I'm a shomer and not a mazik, I have a higher level of liability to make the person whole whose object I was watching. Whereas if I'm a mazik, my level of liability is only directly related to the amount of damage that I caused, which doesn't seem to be taken into consideration by the Zera Yaakov, by the second opinion. He doesn't make that distinction at all, which is quite fascinating. I'm not sure I understand why one takes that into account and the other one doesn't take that into account.
So I can work the other way as well. The second opinion, if the replacement cost of the various, for argument's sake, went down to $300. So then the person who, does it get reimbursed for $150, okay? Can he still claim it? We have to the jeweler, that he should get $200 because at that point, yeah, the comment that it came in the hearings that it was going to be $200.
Yeah, it's an excellent point. What if there was a reduction in their value? We saw that issue when we saw a previous tshuva where a woman lent a necklace to her friend to go to a wedding, and then she comes back and realizes she can't find it. And so she ends up paying her neighbor for the amount that she paid for the necklace. And then she finds the necklace. Remember, we saw this tshuva. And the neighbor says, no, it's okay, you keep the necklace, because she realizes that maybe it's gone down in value and she'd rather have the cash. So there too, we saw that once she's accepted the cash and the transaction is completed, I think we said that she doesn't have the woman who lost the necklace doesn't have a right to demand back her money.
In this case, he's not paying money back. He's just going to hire somebody else to make the earring for him.
Well, the jeweler should really offer to create a replacement earring. Let's say he doesn't have that ability. He's not that skilled, and he would have to take it to somebody else to do. So it wouldn't matter whether it's cash or a replacement of the earring. And then, of course, you have to ask the question, what if he gets it replaced, but it's schlocky and it doesn't look the same as the other earring, right? And he says, what are you talking about? It's exactly the same. And then you say, no, it's not. It's not the same workmanship.
Looks new. The other one looks a little bit older. So maybe the other one is maybe the color is.
Well, that can always be compensated. You can always clean jewelry and stuff like that, make it look new. All right, so this is quite interesting, fellas. And so, like many of the tshuvas we've seen, when there's not a clear-cut psak, the party who's liable can always say kimli. Okay, so let's go on to the next tshuva. Bedin shochet sheni bel keves b'shchitasa. Switching gears a little bit, a person is a shochet. He was given a sheep, and he makes it non-kosher. Haytalanu simcha mishpachtit v'shachatnu keves l'suda. Very, very Sephardic shaila. I can't imagine an Ashkenazi Jew ever asking this shaila. We made a simcha, and we purchased a live sheep, and we gave it to the shochet to shecht it, so that we could prepare it for our festive family get-together. Okay, hizamnu shochet vatik b'moshav. So we hired an experienced shochet who lives in our moshav. Aval tza'arenu hu lo shochato v'hakeves nitnabel b'shchita. But he botched the job. It's a good thing he wasn't a moil. It was only a shochet, right? and he messed up and did not do a good job in the shchita, and the animal is now not kosher. It's an avela. Does the shochet now have to compensate us for our loss of this sheep? And if he's not liable, do we have to still pay him for his services? Remember, he says, look, I took all of this time out of my day, set aside an hour to take care of the shechita. I was going to check the animal, everything. And then all of a sudden you hear him say, whoops, right? That's the one word you never want to hear a moil say, right? Whoops, right? So the shochet says, I'm sorry, it's an honest mistake. Mistakes happen, right? Just like in medicine, mistakes happen, nothing you can do, right? When is it considered malpractice? Shchita malpractice, and when is it considered to be just an honest mistake? And do we have to pay him for his services rendered? Okay. Marv, you want to chime in before we get started?
Yeah, this is also common in secular law, not with a shchita, but for example, say a simcha where you rent a wedding hall and the hall messes up your simcha. You have to still pay for the services and goods, or the band the band blows the amp and they can't, they mess up the entire musical part of the simcha. So again, you've hired someone to do a service and now they've performed it or not performed it as well as you wanted, you still have to pay. So, but in secular law, the issue also is not in those kinds of cases, not only do I get my money back or do I have to pay, but am I also entitled to, for example, mental distress damages on top of that from them? That's another issue
Right,
that.
because they ruined my party.
Yeah, now, and it uses like here, it's Sarenu, right? Like they messed up, we're really upset about the whole thing. So
Yeah.
do you get damages for that too? At least in secular law, that's an issue.
There's also a Gemara, I read a Gemara that's like if some like a rabbi or something hired some people to like transport some wine or something, and these guys just dropped and broke, he still has to pay them for their time, and they don't have to replace the product that they wasted.
Okay, well, so that's what we're going to see. Do I still have to pay them for their labor? Does it matter? To what degree was there negligence? To what degree was the mishap avertible? And that's all going to be part of this calculus. So let's get started. Hagemara omeret b'masechet bava kama, Amar Shmuel tavach uman or tabach uman shekilkel chayav l'shalem. So Shmuel says an expert shoichet who messes up, if he messes up the job and doesn't shecht properly, he's liable. Mazikhu posheyahu. Why? Because he's a mazik, he's negligent. V'nase ka'omer lo shchot li mikan v'shochat lo mikan. And it's almost as if there was an implicit instruction, shecht for me at this place on the animal's neck, and the guy instead slaughtered it at the wrong place.
That's not right. The shochet would know where to check. The layman does not know where to check.
Right, so that's the reason, is that the layman relies on an expert shoichet's knowledge of where to shecht. So if the expert shoichet ends up shechting in the wrong place, it's as if the layman can say to him, I relied on you that you would know the right place on the neck to shecht. Like, what were you doing shechting it, on its torso instead of shechting it on its neck? Like were you drunk? Like, what were you thinking? The Hagemara biara kavana Shmuel. The Masha Omar Maziku. So the Gemara explains Shmuel's statement. When he calls him a mazik, Hainu lomar shemazik chayev afilu ba'onsin kevin da'adam wad la'olam. That is to say, that even if it would happen by complete accident, let's say he thought that the animal was stable and was being held down properly. And all of a sudden, just as he goes in for the cut, the animal jerks violently. And so he ends up placing the knife in the wrong part of the neck because the animal jerked, and it's not his liability because it wasn't his fault. So nonetheless, he's going to be chayiv, because when you're a mazik, you're chayiv even for own sin, even for things that happen as a total mishap. Umasha Omar posheyahu, hainu lomar shafilu ibu shochet bechinam chayiv. And that means also and the statement that that the Gemara calls him negligent means that even if he was doing his service as a favor to the family, he would still have to pay for the animal, because a shomer chinam, a person who's entrusted with an animal and is doing it for free, still has to pay if a mishap happens under his watch. Shahayalo lahakbid b'shchita, should have been more careful with the shchita. V'lachein pashut, and therefore it seems obvious. Shim hu lo mumcha b'shchita, if he's not an expert shoichet, so then chayiv beinim shochat bechinam bein bischar, then he's going to be liable whether he did it as a favor or whether he did it for pay, because either way, the fact that he's taking responsibility for it is going to make him liable. Aval imhu shochet mumcha shekvar shochat lepachos shalosh pa'amim. He says, if, however, he's considered to be an experienced or expert shoichet because he's already slaughtered at least 3 times, right? Isn't that what they say in medicine? See one, do one, teach one. right? So here it's C1, do 3, and then you're an expert, right? Yeah. So then she'ef shalom or posheyahu. Here we can't really say that there was negligence because this guy knows what he's doing. Okay. In a case where he's not an expert and he takes it upon himself to do it and he botches the shechita, so then he's totally a posheya because, like, who told you to go ahead and take that responsibility? You didn't know what you were doing, right? But if he's already shechted at least 3 times, so he's demonstrated a proficiency in this act, and this one time he has a mishap, so he's not a posheya. Fine. Imshachat bechinam pater mitashlum. So that only make him exempt to pay for the value of the animal if he decided to do this shechita for free. Shekevin shehu mumcha omrim shemazolo shel balakeves garim shetiya nevela. He says, because basically we say to the owner of the sheep, listen, the guy knows what he's doing. Some kind of crazy mishap occurred that he turned it into an avela. So sorry, it's your bad mazel. But if he's slaughtered for pay, then he's going to be liable even if he's an expert. And we'll have to continue this discussion, Amir Hashem, tomorrow. Okay, everyone have a great day.